Lighting the lights down a little lower.
Is that too much? Or?
That's perfect. Thank you. All right, here we go. So we're going to talk to you tonight about a kind of long-term project, which we're right in the middle of. But before we do that, we want to just say a line about who we are and where we came from, each of us. And there's a very important person who's not here tonight, Dawn Sumner, who's been a key figure in this project, both for technology and for her dreams and just generally generous spirit. But she's on, although she's with us in spirit, her body is in Pasadena right now. So I just wanted to acknowledge her at the beginning. And then there's me. I'm the instigating artist on this project. I have a history of being trained as a painter, but then kind of moving into a lot of different media, including visual art, performance, etc. But I'm going to go back and to place you with my artwork, just show you one of really quite old work from that was also a long and ongoing project from the late 1980s, finished in 1981. It took me so long because it was this large-scale architectural scale project, 7 rooms, 7 niches, and the main thing about it that I want to point out, it was a maze that you walked into that was a total work of art, painted sculpture, niches, lighting, all kind of thought about. So I had this instinct or this desire for an art that you could experience with your body as well as with your eyes. And that to some degree was assuaged by moving into a little bit more performative things and so forth. But I didn't know what was coming. The perfect thing we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But before we do that, Jordan is going to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Jordan Aalsburg, and I'm a researcher in the physics department, where I work with Jim Crutchfield and some others using virtual reality for scientific visualization. For the last couple of years, we've been working on Vroom, a tool for quickly developing virtual reality applications. The primary goal of Vroom is to reduce the amount of time and energy required to visualize and interact with data in 3D. Additionally, we've been working on reducing the cost and size of those visualization systems so that more labs and classrooms can have access to this technology. Vroom is built on top of the virtual reality user interface library, which is also being developed here at UC Davis by Oliver Carlos and the Caves Research Group. For those of you who have not seen the cave, here's a picture of it. The cave is a really impressive piece of hardware. There's it's a virtual reality space you can actually, it's fully immersive, you can walk in it. This gives you a sense of the scale. There's 4 screens, 3 walls and a floor. Each screen is controlled by a separate computer, which is responsible for figuring out which part of the scene needs to be rendered for that particular screen. The user wears 3D glasses, and has a wand, both of which are tracked, and the system draws the scene for the exact position and orientation of the user. This enables the user to walk around inside the cave and explore their data for simulation. I gave a tour this last summer to some high school students in Cosmos, and there's this demo program we always start people off with, which has a model of the Earth. And one of the things that I always have the people who were, the first time they put on the track glasses, what I'd have them scale it up till it was about this size, and then stick their head in it. And that was usually the part where the really immersive part kind of clicked, because all of a sudden, and even people who aren't in the cave from outside, all of a sudden see the entire space taken over with the image of the globe. And it really is a very different experience than the sort of passive 3D that you experience in a movie theater or if you watch a movie on TV. So while the cave is really cool, it's also really expensive and really big. Our research group is interested in developing low-cost VR systems. We currently run all of our software on consumer electronics, so you can get in a regular big box store or online. This is a picture of our lab. We use regular 3D TVs for the displays and video game controllers for the input devices. This setup brings the cost down from hundreds of thousands of dollars to a few thousand. Everything runs on a normal desktop computer, so the cost is essentially determined by the price of the TV. Which brings us to our newest addition. This is my daughter. She's modeling the Oculus Rift, which is a head-mounted display. There's a screen inside for each eye, so you see a 3D image just like you would on a 3D TV. It's also capable of tracking the orientation of the user's head. This lets you stand in the middle of a scene and be surrounded by all directions, which offers a really amazing perspective on your data or simulation. But one of the most amazing things about this device is the price, which is this isn't released yet. They're looking to, I think, get it into the market next year, but their price point for this is around, I think they're looking for $300, which would bring the overall cost of an immersive VR system down to under $1,000. And this is also portable, so a system built around one of these could be shared between classrooms. So there's lots of really amazing technologies coming out right now. And these are sort of some of the devices and tools that we're using for developing the Green Vortex.
So, what we're making. I was invited to visit the cave and was just entranced with the experience of being able to walk into a virtual environment and handle virtual objects. So I went home and pretty much almost immediately I just had one of those moments where you kind of know something that you want to see. You don't actually think of it, you just kind of know it. And so I worked it out into a storyboard, which I sent to Don Sumner. And instead of telling me, we can't really, Kate won't do this, it's like, go away. What she said was, gee, this looks kind of interesting. I think maybe we could do this little piece of it. You want to try it? Off and went. As you can see from the data at the top, this was in 2011. And what I had proposed was, this is my rough sketch of one very important thing that I learned about the cave, which is that if you get too involved in what you're doing in there and get too close to the walls, this green grid will come up because they don't want you to go crashing through the walls into the high-powered and highly expensive projectors. So that impressed me a lot. But I thought about walking into another kind of space, which was a whirling or spiraling vortex of images. And the fact that you might, because you could handle the virtual objects, you could reach out and grab them and make them bigger and smaller, that you could, in this vortex of images, you could choose things, and that you could take these images, which I thought of as being dream images, and arrange them in tableaux. So you could move them around. You might have about 12 minutes to play with it, which is about the length of an average dream. So in a way you're in control, but then in a way you're not. Because the last panel, behind the imagery that you're working with, is a chain of associations, as we imagine that we might have in our minds that power other kinds of dreams. And that chain of associations might kick in randomly, so that while you are playing with this and constructing your thing, your lion turns into a tape dispenser, or maybe a giant shoe comes roaring into the space. So the final kind of thing that I knew really right from the first instant of conceiving this project was that I didn't want to do this if it was only my dreams. I'm not very interested actually in this in a psychological kind of sense, an individual psychological sense. What I thought would be really interesting would be to collect dreams from people who work in the lab or who are associated, who are the loose community which flows in, around, and through this research space, and kind of work with those. And not in the sense of perhaps anything so solid as making a portrait, but making it of a group, but making something more diffuse, a kind of system through which something might emerge that might someday say something kind of interesting about that group of people. So it's a very subterranean kind of idea. This is one of the drawings for the prototype. I collected, just to show people what I had in mind, I used a digital tool, Amazon Search. I looked through 400 biographies and memoirs of computer scientists and mathematicians and geologists, the kind of people that work in the cave. And one of them had dreamed about lecturing to daisies. And then this was one of the first dreams about, not at all the first, but one of the first that was given to me by a postdoc, a researcher in the Complexity Sciences Center, who is represented there as this little blue ghost. His dream, as I got into drawing it, I realized I needed some numbers for the football jerseys, and I wanted to do something that would be meaningful or related to him. He's a very discreet person, so there was nothing on the web, no birthday or anything. But I did find a paper in which he was an author, and I understood clearly probably the first couple of sentences of the abstract and the T.S. Eliot poem that the researchers used at the end of the paper to discuss what they were doing mathematically and symbolically with information symmetries. So I thought this was almost magical. The notion, I don't know if you can read the poem, time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. What could be better for dreams, which are our own personal kind of time scramble of predictive information, things that happened in the past, what happened today? So I took the Venn diagram from that illustration, I tore it apart, made the clocks up there, and then I used symbols from the paper on the football shirts. So that was kind of a way of working with the material or engaging with it in this sort of drawing way. And the final element is that this is really very much, it's just a process which I've set in motion. It's not something which I am necessarily the sole author of. But I needed to give back to the people who contributed to the project. And the idea is to then give a digital print of the dream. And if there are people in this room who have contributed dreams who have not got their drawing yet, this person moved away, a long ways away, so he got his dream. But framing is actually my slowest artistic process, so it's an ongoing effort. So now we'll talk about how we're actually making this vision come to fruition, and Jordan is going to take over.
So the hardware side of our research is aimed at reducing the cost of GR systems so they can find their way in the labs and classrooms. On the software side, we've been working to make writing programs for these systems faster and easier. And this is where my connection to the Dream Vortex comes in. Earlier this year, I was talking with Meredith about the Dream Vortex. Specifically, is there a vortex part of the Vortex? At the time, the Dream Vortex was basically a modified version of some network visualization software that we had. And this is, this is a picture of it right here, which the program was for visualizing complex networks and graphs in 3 dimensions. And here you see that there's nodes for the dreams, and the related dreams are connected. And I think there's just some labels about what the dream title is. And then this is a slightly later version, still using the same software here. That the nodes have been replaced with actually some of the dream images that Meredith painted or drew. But there was no. And I asked her about the Dream Vortex, and that's when I saw the storyboard that was shown earlier, which clearly had a vortex. And I thought that maybe Room could be used to help in the development of this part of the project. One of the features of Room that I really like is that it has a live coding environment. This means that you can modify a program while it's running without restarting it. One of the reasons I like it so much is that it turned out to be useful in a completely different way than I had originally imagined. When we were first working on implementing it, I thought it would be used to sort of fine-tune the visual appearance at the end of the development cycle. But what I didn't anticipate was how useful it would be for developing programs from the start. nowadays when I begin a project, I start with a completely blank screen and basically build everything in this live coding environment. The immediate feedback that you get is great for when you don't know exactly what direction you're headed with the program or know what you're doing, which in my case is fairly often. What's particularly useful about the live coding is that you can build things up incrementally and add features as they're needed rather than having to sit down at the beginning and plan everything out before you start. And if something doesn't work out, you can just delete it. So I'm going to show a video now which basically shows how I started working on the Dream Vortex. It's sort of like a reenactment. What you're going to see is a typical Vroom programming session with the program source code in one window and the program running in another window. What you're not going to see is the part right before that where I Googled tornado dynamics. And after getting through a bunch of links on bleeding edge tornado simulations, I found that you can get a pretty decent tornado with a simple spiral equation. So this is what I started with. This is the radius, and it increases as you increase the angle theta. And you have two parameters, A and B. And changing those will change the shape of the spiral and the resulting vortex. So I guess you can kind of see it. So right now the program is running. Right down here in the bottom right is the actual program, and on the left is the code which is being edited. And there's the font's a little small, but I'll try and just narrate what's happening. So there's basically an equation at this point that implements the spiral equation that you saw before. So you give it an angle, and it finds the radius and converts that into a position. And at first, the z value is set to 0, so we're actually just going to start by it actually working in 2D. So a bunch of angles are, we start with a 0 and sort of gradually incrementally add a little bit to increase the angle a little bit each time, and then draw it over here. And at first, it's just a bunch of points because it's just what the function spit out, which is just x, y, z values. But what we actually want to do is sort of build up this 3D vortex. So we need to turn these into lines, which is really simple. We can just tell the program to interpret the data as lines instead of points. And then as soon as we update it, you see it again. And here you can see that the sort of the live program. The video is jerky. It doesn't actually do that in real life. But here you can see that you can still interact with the program as you're making changes. And this is really great for simulations and for visualizing stuff, particularly in cases like this where I didn't really know what parameters would be good, like how to make a spiral. And I could just change the A and B values around and instantly get feedback on how that looks. And here, in fact, we can, by adding some Z, now we've added another dimension to it. Now we're approaching something that looks like a tornado or vortex. While this is a simple equation, even for more complex systems where you don't know anything about it, you can learn a lot by changing some values and observing the change in the system. And this real-time feedback is why I now pretty much default to just working in this type of live coding environment. I'll just skip there. Once we had once we had the basic vortex shape implemented, we started to add all the various parts that would get towards this vision that Meredith had in the storyboard of this swirling, spinning vortex. The first thing we need to do is make it dynamic, and that's so we added some particles here. And these, and there's a final video at the end that'll show where they actually spin around. And one of the things that we found that we realized early on was how important randomness was in getting everything to look right. With the same A and B value, all the particles would obviously just spin around and it would just follow the same path, and that doesn't look good. We wanted the vortex to look full, and to accomplish this, we gave each particle a random A and B value, but determining the range for those was something again that was done through experimentation, and that's where the live programming was particularly helpful, because we could changed the values while the simulation was running until we found something that we liked. This is the next step where we started to work on the appearance of the vortex and trying to get it to look like a storyboard. Basically, at this point, we've just replaced the 1D lines with 2-dimensional strips, and there's a little texture on it to make it look kind of like a brush stroke. And when we make that grayscale, it starts to look a little bit like the image there. And then finally, we put all these elements together, the brush strokes and the particles and the dynamics, and we got to our sort of first ever dream vortex. Back out a second. So here's this is the combined sort of all these sketches sort of put together into a single program now, where we have the swirly vortex, the dream images that Meredith has been working on, and the images sort of fade in and out. And this is where we're at now, which is really just kind of a starting point for the project. The next step, of course, is to add the interaction, where you can grab the dreams and form a scene with them, and then tie that back into the part that we saw earlier, where there's this network graph of interrelated dreams, which will then morph into each other if they're connected in some way.
Yeah. Wow. And so those are Jordan's next steps, and I have my next steps too, but I had to, actually I learned from Don. I got very nervous when we first showed this, one of the early prototypes at Maker Faire. It wasn't a finished piece, it didn't look the way I wanted. But that's one of the things I've gotten from this, is that this is an iterative process, and the kind of look that I'm going for will continue to develop through the next prototypes. So it's just been an absolutely wonderful, amazing adventure all the way around, and we want to say thank you. Special thanks to Anna Davidson and to Godfather of our project, who's going to talk with us. And also thank you to Piero, who has made all of these things possible. That's it.